When Chief Wachuku arrives this evening, you will not be seen. Do you hear me? Not at the door, not in the parlor, not carrying so much as a tray. You will stay in that store where you belong. Yes, Ma. I only wanted to help serve. Serve? You? Look at yourself. You are the shame of this family, Somto. The one disgrace my late husband forced into this house. I have spent 11 years hiding you from decent people, and I will not have you crawling out to embarrass us in the most important night of a doggo's life. Wear something and disappear. That is your one talent, disappearing. Somto Nnaji lowered her eyes, said, "Yes, Ma," and disappeared, the way she had been trained to disappear for 11 years, into the storeroom at the back of the great Okoro mansion in Port Harcourt. And Madame Chioma Okoro straightened her wrapper, satisfied, and went to prepare her daughter for the millionaire. Never once imagining that before the week was finished, the millionaire would look past her powdered, perfumed daughter, past her, past everything she had built her whole life around, and ask the shame of the family to be his wife. My people, before we talk about the proposal that turned that mansion upside down, we must first talk about what was built and who really did the building. Because nothing that happened in the Okoro house that week makes sense until you know whose kindness those proud people were actually standing on. The Okoro name meant something in Port Harcourt. Chief Ikenna Okoro had built Okoro haulage from a single second-hand truck into a fleet that moved cargo from the ports across the whole of the South. Tankers, trailers, contracts with the oil servicing firms, a yard full of rigs with his name painted on the doors. When he drove through the old neighborhood, men who had known him when he had nothing stood up from their benches out of respect. The mansion, the cars, the way Madame Chioma could empty a boutique in Lagos in an afternoon, all of it rested on that fleet. And the fleet rested, everyone believed, on one poor young man's stubborn hustle decades ago. Everyone believed that. It was not quite true. And the part that was not true is the whole of this story. Because 40 years ago, before the first truck, before the name, Ikenna Okoro was a nobody, loading other men's lorries at the Port Harcourt wharf. And one rainy season he fell sick with a fever that should have killed him, alone in a single room with no one to fetch him water. The man who found him, who carried him on his own back to the clinic, who paid for the treatment out of savings he did not have, who fed him for 3 months while he recovered, and then, this is the part, my people, who lent that recovered young man the exact sum he needed to buy his first broken-down truck, and told him, "Pay me when God has blessed you, and if he never does, then it was a gift." That man was a poor roadside mechanic named Pa Nnaji. Picture it, my people, because the whole account this story finally settles begins in that one small scene. A poor mechanic, grease under his nails and barely enough for his own pot, carrying a feverish stranger on his back through the rain to a clinic, and then emptying the little tin where he kept his savings, the savings meant for his own daughter's future, to pay for a man he did not know. And when the stranger recovered and wept and swore to repay him, Pa Nnaji waved it away and said the words that would echo across 40 years and 2 generations. "Pay me when God has blessed you, and if he never does, then it was a gift, and I have lost nothing because a life is worth more than money." He kept no paper. He asked for no witness. Real kindness never keeps receipts. And that, my people, is exactly why the world so often forgets to pay it. But forgetting a debt is not the same as canceling it. An unpaid debt of kindness does not disappear. It only waits for a hand honest enough to finally settle it. Pa Nnaji never got rich. Kindness rarely makes the kind person rich. That is one of the quiet injustices this world runs on. He fixed engines by the roadside until his hands gave out, and he died with very little, leaving behind one daughter, a girl of 12 named Somto, and no one to take her. And Chief Ikenna Okoro, by then a wealthy man who had long since forgotten to repay the loan that built his empire, heard that the daughter of the man who saved his life was now an orphan with nowhere to go. Something in him, guilt maybe,
or the last honest corner of a heart that had grown crooked with money, made him send for her. He brought Somto into his house.
But he was a coward in the specific way rich men are cowards. He could not bring himself to tell his sharp, status-hungry wife the truth, that this ragged girl was the daughter of the man they owed everything to. So he told Madame Chioma only that he was taking in a poor relation out of charity. Charity, my people. He repaid the daughter of the man who gave him his life and his fortune by filing her under charity in his own house and never correcting the record. And when Chief Emenike died 3 years later, whatever thin protection his presence gave the girl died with him. Madame Chioma, who had never wanted the charity case under her roof, wasted no time. Somto was pulled out of school. Somto was moved to the storeroom. Somto became the maid, unpaid, unthanked, and, whenever the widow's temper needed somewhere to land, the shame of this family. If you have ever watched proud people despise the very person their whole comfort was quietly built on, and get away with it for years, type "they never knew" in the comments, because the Okoro women did not know what they were standing on, and the day the ground finally spoke, it spoke very loudly. For 11 years, Somto served. Let me show you just one of those years, so it is not only a number to you. There was a Christmas. Somto was perhaps 17, when the Okoro house was full of important guests, and a crystal glass slipped from Adaugo's own careless hand and shattered on the marble floor. Without a blink, Adaugo pointed and said, "She pushed me." And Madame Chioma, in front of 40 guests, made Somto kneel on the broken crystal and apologize, and then eat her Christmas meal alone in the storeroom, off the plates the guests had left behind. Somto knelt. Somto apologized. Somto ate alone. And then, this is the part I need you to see. She carried a wrapped portion of that same leftover food out to the night watchman shivering at the gate, and sat with him a while, so that he would not have to eat alone either. My people, that is who she was in the years when no one was watching. They could make her kneel. They could not make her cruel. Those are two entirely different powers, and the second one is the only one that lasts. And here is the thing about Somto that Madame Chioma, in all her sharpness, never once bothered to see, because she had decided long ago that there was nothing in the girl worth seeing. Somto was clever. Deeply, quietly clever. The way her father had been clever with a dead engine. She had loved school in the years she was allowed it, and she never stopped learning after they took it from her. She read every discarded newspaper. She listened at every doorway. And somewhere in those 11 years, without anyone noticing, Somto Nnaji came to understand the Okoro business better than the widow who now owned it. Because Madame Chioma did not understand it at all. She understood spending. She did not understand haulage, the contracts, the maintenance, the diesel, the margins, the bribes at the ports, the drivers who needed to be paid on time or they walked. After Chief Emenike died, she ran his fleet the way she ran her wardrobe. She took, and she took, and she never once asked what was being put back. Trucks broke down and were not repaired. Good drivers left unpaid and were replaced with cheaper, careless ones. Contracts lapsed because no one filed the paperwork. The fleet that had taken 40 years to build began quietly to rust and shrink and sink into debt. And the only person in that entire mansion who saw it happening clearly was the girl in the storeroom. Somto watched the empire her own father had made possible being run into the ground by a woman who called her a disgrace. And she said nothing, because who listens to the maid? But she watched, and she understood, and she remembered. Remembering, my people, is the one thing they can never take from you, no matter how small they make you. They can take your name, your school, your bed, your dignity in front of guests. They cannot take what you have already understood. That stays yours in the dark. By the time Chief Ikenna Wachuku's name entered that house,
The Okoro fleet was one bad quarter from collapse, and Madame Chioma knew it, though she would have died before admitting it to a soul. Chief Ikenna Wachuku was new money, and a great deal of it. Shipping, logistics, a young self-made magnate whose company was expanding across the Niger Delta and swallowing smaller operators as it grew. To a drowning woman like Madame Chioma, he was not a man. He was a lifeboat. If she could marry her daughter Adaogo to Chief Wachuku, his money and his contracts would fold the failing Okoro fleet safely inside his empire. And no one would ever have to know how close the great Okoro name had come to ruin. That was the plan.
That was the entire reason for the grand dinner, the imported wine, the seamstress working through the night on Adaogo's dress. It was not a courtship. It was a rescue, dressed as one. And Madame Chioma had cast her spoiled daughter as the bride, and the maid as the thing to be hidden. Adaogo, for her part, played the role with relish. She was her mother's daughter to the bone, beautiful, idle, and cruel in the casual way of people who have never once been told no. She had spent 11 years using Somto as a footstool for her moods, and on the night of the great dinner, she made sure to hand Somto her dirtied shoes to clean with a smile that said, "Remember what you are," before disappearing to be draped in lace for a man she intended to trap. The dinner came. Chief Wachuku arrived, composed, watchful, a man who said little and saw much. And here, my people, the plan began, very quietly, to go wrong, in a way no one in that house had the eyes to notice until it was far too late. Because Chief Ikenna Wachuku was not watching Adaogo. It started small. A guest of that stature is given the run of a house, and as the evening moved, the chief excused himself and wandered. And in a back corridor he came upon the old gateman, Pa Sunday, a stooped, half-forgotten man who had opened that gate for 30 years, sitting on a low stool being handed a covered plate of food by a young woman in a plain wrapper. The young woman did not know the chief was watching. She simply crouched beside the old man, asked after his bad leg, made him laugh at something, and made sure he ate before she carried the family's fine plates back to their fine table. Then she disappeared down the corridor. "Who is that young woman?" Chief Wachuku asked, later, lightly, of Madame Chioma. "Oh, nobody, Chief. A house girl. A charity case my late husband took in. Pay her no mind, please. She is a bit of an embarrassment to us. Now, let me tell you more about my Adaogo. Nobody. A house girl. Pay her no mind. My people, hold those 3 sentences, because the woman who spoke them had no idea she had just described to the one man on earth who had been searching for her, the very person he had come to find." Over the days that followed, for a courtship of that importance does not end in one dinner, Chief Wachuku found more and more reasons to be at the Okoro mansion, and Madame Chioma, delighted, credited her daughter's charms. But the chief's eyes kept finding the girl at the edges of things. He saw her settle a shouting match between 2 of the Okoro drivers in the yard with a few quiet, informed words. Words that revealed she knew exactly which routes paid and which contracts had lapsed. More than the drivers knew, more than the widow knew. He saw her slip her own small portion of meat onto the plate of a younger servant who was ill. He saw the whole household treat her as furniture, and he saw her refuse in 1,000 tiny ways to become furniture in her own heart. On the 5th day, the chief did a small, deliberate thing, the kind of quiet test that tells you everything about a person. He left a folded bundle of naira, a serious sum, more than a maid earned in a year, on the floor of the corridor Somto swept each morning, and he watched from the shadow of a doorway to see what she would do. Somto found it. She stood a long moment with that money in her hand, and God knows, my people, she had reason to keep it. 11 years unpaid, a storeroom for a bed, a future stolen from her. Then she carried it straight to the head steward, every last note,
and asked that it be returned to whichever guest had dropped it. She did not know she was being watched. She never once did the right thing for an audience. She did it because it was simply who her father's daughter was, whether a single soul saw it or not. Chief Ikenna Wachuku stepped back into the shadow, and by the time that money was back in his own pocket, his mind was entirely made up. He had not come to Port Harcourt looking for a beautiful bride. He had come to repay a debt of honor, and he had just watched the debt reveal itself worthy of every naira of it. If you have ever been the person a whole room decided was invisible, while one quiet observer saw absolutely everything, type "seen" in the comments, because Somto did not know it yet, but she had been seen completely by the one pair of eyes that mattered. On the 7th day, Chief Ikenna Wachuku sat in the grand parlor of the Okoro mansion, with Madame Chioma beaming and the Daogo posed on the good sofa in her finest lace, and he said the words the widow had been praying for all week. "I have come to the decision about marriage that this family has been so graciously hoping for." Madame Chioma actually pressed her hands to her chest. Daogo lowered her eyes in practiced modesty. "I would like," the chief continued, "to marry Somto. My people, I wish you could have seen that parlor."
I wish you could have seen the exact second the word landed, the maid's name in the mouth of the millionaire, in the good parlor, on the good sofa. Adago's practiced smile froze and then cracked. Madame Chioma's beam curdled into confusion, then into something uglier. "Somto? Chief, there must be some mistake. Somto is the house girl. The charity case. You cannot possibly mean—" "I mean the daughter of Pa Nnaji," said Chief Ikenna Wachuku, and his voice, for the first time all week, was not soft at all. "I mean the young woman you keep in a storeroom and call the shame of your family. Her and no other. And now, madam, I think it is time somebody in this house told the truth about who she is. Since you will not, I will. And here, my people, is the first turn, the one that took the ground out from under that proud house entirely. My father," the chief said, "was a young apprentice at the Port Harcourt wharf 40 years ago. He would have died in his sickness that season, like many did, except a poor roadside mechanic carried him to a clinic and paid for his life and asked for nothing. That mechanic's name was Pa Nnaji. Everything my father later became, and everything I have built on top of it, began with that one man's kindness. My father raised me on that story. His last instruction to me before he died was, find Nnaji, or find his children, and repay what can never truly be repaid. I have been searching for Pa Nnaji's daughter for 6 years. He turned and looked at Somto, who had been summoned from the storeroom to serve drinks and now stood frozen in the doorway with a tray in her hands. I traced her at last to Port Harcourt, to this street, to this house, and I came here expecting to find her a guest, perhaps a poor relation being cared for out of gratitude by a family that surely knew what it owed her. Instead, I found her cleaning that girl's shoes." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Madame Chioma, your husband's entire fortune, this house, that fleet, the lace on your daughter's back, was built with money that a poor mechanic lent him and never asked back. You have spent 11 years grinding that same mechanic's orphaned daughter into a servant and calling her your shame. Do you understand me? You have been living all this time on the kindness of the very girl you spit on. She is not the charity in this house. You are." The tray slipped in Somto's hands, because Somto herself had not known.
Her father had never told her what he did for a stranger at the wharf. Kind men rarely keep receipts. She had grown up believing she was exactly what the Okoros said she was, a nobody taken in out of pity. And now, in a parlor full of people who despised her, a stranger was telling her that the house that despised her had been built by her own father's mercy. My people, let me stop the story here for one moment.
because I do not want you to rush past the thing that actually matters in it. We love these stories for the moment the proud are humbled. I understand that. I feel it too. But underneath the drama is something quieter and far more important, and it is this. A debt of kindness does not die when the kind person dies. It goes into the ground with them, and it waits. Sometimes it waits a whole generation, and then, in its own time, in its own way, it rises and it comes to collect. Not always as revenge, but as a reckoning, as a setting right of an account the world tried to close without paying. Pa Nnaji died poor and unthanked, but the kindness he put into a dying stranger 40 years ago was not lost. It was only traveling. And it took 4 decades and 2 generations to arrive, but it arrived, in the shape of a millionaire standing in a parlor, saying a servant girl's name like it was worth something. Because it always was. If a kindness you once gave, or a kindness someone once gave you, has ever come circling back around when you least expected it, type "It came back" in the comments. Because the whole of Somto's life had just turned on a mercy performed before she was even born. And there was still more of it on its way. Now, a lesser woman than Madame Chioma might have wept, or confessed, or begged. Madame Chioma did what proud, cornered people so often do. She reached for one more lie to save herself. And it was the lie that finished her. There is a lesson buried in that moment worth more than the gold ring itself, my people. When a proud person is finally cornered by the truth, watch closely what they do, because they will almost never choose the one thing that could still save them, which is honesty. Instead, they reach, in a panic, for a bigger lie to cover the first one. And the bigger lie is always clumsier, because it is built in fear where the calm thing should be. Madame Chioma could have wept and confessed and thrown herself on the mercy of a room that might have found some small pity for her. Instead, she snatched up the ugliest weapon in the house. "She is a thief!" the widow burst out, wild now, grasping. "That is the truth of your precious Nnaji girl, Chief. Years ago she stole my late husband's ring, his signet ring, gold, the most precious thing in this house, and I have never been able to prove it, but everybody knows. You would marry a thief? Search her things, search the storeroom, you will see what she is." And Somto, still standing in the doorway, still holding the ruined tray, finally spoke, in a voice that did not shake, because some truths steady you even as they cost you everything. "I did not steal the ring, Ma," she said quietly. "You did. You took it back from me. Because Chief Emenike gave that ring to me himself, on the night he died. He called me to his bedside when you were not in the room, and he pressed it into my hand. And he was crying, and he said, 'This was your father's doing, all of it. I owed him my life, and I paid him back with silence. This ring, and the letter with it, is yours. It is the little I can do. Do not let them take it from you.' And you took it from me, 3 days after we buried him. You took the letter too. I was 14. I could not stop you. I have carried what he said in my head for 11 years, because you took the only proof out of my hands." The parlor had gone completely silent. And here, my people, is the second turn. And it is the one the widow never saw coming. Because cruelty makes people stupid about the small people they step on. It never occurs to them that the small people are watching and remembering, and that others are watching too. Old Pa Sunday, the gateman, the stooped, forgotten man to whom Somto had carried a covered plate of food while the millionaire watched. Pa Sunday had been at that gate for 30 years. He had been at that gate the night Chief Emenike died. And he stepped forward now, into a parlor a gateman had no business entering, twisting his cap in his ruined hands. "Madam, forgive me," he said, "but I cannot stand here and let this happen again. The letter you took from this child, you did not destroy it. I saw you. I saw you take it to the old safe in the master's study, the one you think nobody else knows the combination to, because the master gave it to me himself 20 years ago, so I could bring him documents when his legs failed. The letter is still there, madam.
In your own hand, you locked away the proof of everything you have spent 11 years lying about. I am an old man. I have kept that gate and that secret because I was afraid for my job. But I am too old now to be more afraid of you than I am ashamed of myself. The letter is in the safe. They opened the safe. The letter was in the safe. In Chief Emenike Okoro's own dying hand, it named Somto Nnaji as the daughter of the man who built his fortune, confessed the debt he had never repaid, and left to her, in plain words, a full 1/3 share of Okoro haulage, a share his widow had spent 11 years pretending did not exist, while grinding its owner into a servant. The girl they called the shame of the family had owned 1/3 of that failing empire since she was 14 years old. Let me tell you how it ended, my people, because this is where Somto became something greater than a girl who was finally proven right. She could have destroyed them. She had every right, and a millionaire at her side, and the law on her paper, and 11 years of humiliation in her chest. The whole city would have understood. Instead, Somto did the thing that separates the people who were merely wronged from the people who are actually great. She thought not about what the Okoro women deserved, but about who she wanted to become on the other side of this. She did not marry Chief Ikenna Wachuku as a rescue. Understand me clearly, my people, because this matters. She did not fall into his arms as the grateful servant saved by the rich man. That would only have been a softer, prettier version of being small. She thanked him for the truth, and for the search, and for the honor of his proposal. And then she asked him for something far more valuable than a wedding. She asked him for a loan, at fair terms, businesswoman to businessman, so that she could exercise the right her father's kindness and Chief Emenike's dying conscience had left her, and buy the Okoro fleet herself. Not to crush it, to save it. Because it was, when you traced it all the way down, her own father's legacy, and she would not let it die just to spite the women who had misused it. She took control of Okoro haulage, the 1/3 that was already hers by right, and the rest bought fair and square from a widow who had run it into the ground and had no way left to refuse. She kept every honest driver. She paid the wages Madame Chioma had let rot. She repaired the rusting trucks. And within 2 years, in the hands of the girl who had studied that business from a storeroom no one thought she was clever enough to think in, the fleet that had been 1/4 from collapse was running again, larger than before, with her father's name, Nnaji, now painted beside Okoro on every door. There was a morning, about a year into that rebuilding, when the first full convoy of repaired, repainted trucks rolled out of the yard at dawn, bound for the ports. A long line of engines her father would have known how to fix in his sleep, moving at last under his own name. Somto stood at the gate and watched them go, and old Pa Sunday stood beside her, and for a long while neither of them said a word, because some things are simply too large for words to carry. 40 years earlier, a poor mechanic had lent a dying stranger the price of one broken-down truck and asked for nothing at all. Now his daughter stood watching a whole fleet of them roll out under his name, in the very city where he had died with almost nothing. My people, the account had not merely been settled. It had been settled with interest, the way kindness always pays in the end, if you only give it long enough to travel. And Madame Chioma and Hidalgo? Somto did not throw them into the street. That, too, is the measure of her. She let them keep the mansion and a modest allowance, drawn from the very business they had nearly destroyed and now depended on her to run. She let them live, but she let them live knowing
knowing whose kindness the roof over their heads had always been, knowing that the girl they had called the family's shame now signed the check that fed them. There is a particular kind of justice, my people, that is quieter and heavier than any eviction. It is to make the proud depend every single day on the mercy of the person they were sure they could step on forever. Madame Chioma never called anyone shame again. She had learned, at last, where the shame in that house had actually been sitting for 11 years, and it had not been in the storeroom. Somto did not forget the two people who spoke the truth when it cost them. Old Pa Sunday, the gateman who chose his shame over his fear, never opened another gate for anyone.
Somto pensioned him fully, moved him into a small, comfortable house of his own, and visited him with a covered plate of food, herself, until the day he died. The same plate she had once carried him in secret now carried to him in the open, by a woman no one dared call nobody. And the young sick servant Somto had once slipped her own meat to, a girl named Ngozi, Somto put through the schooling she herself had been denied, because she had learned in the hardest possible way that the whole world turns on who bothers to see the person everyone else has agreed not to. And Chief Ikenna Wachuku? He did not vanish, and Somto did not marry him out of gratitude. They came to know each other slowly. Over the 2 years she spent rebuilding her father's legacy with her own 2 hands, as equals, a magnate and a haulage owner. 2 self-made people with a debt of kindness braided quietly through both their fathers' lives. When she finally married him, she married him as Somto Nnaji, businesswoman, on her own ground, with her own name already meaning something in Port Harcourt before his was ever added to it. She did not walk into that marriage a rescued maid. She walked in a woman who had reclaimed her father's honor and her own name, and who happened also to have found love on the far side of it. There is a very great difference between those 2 brides, my people, and Somto had spent everything she had to make sure she was the second one. If this story reached somewhere real in you tonight, if you have ever been the quiet one in a proud house, the one they were sure was nothing, then do not leave this family without joining it first. Subscribe now, so the next story finds you the very night it lands. And tell me, in the comments, what city, what country is this story reaching you in tonight? From Lagos to London, from Accra to Atlanta, from Nairobi to New York, from Port Harcourt to Peckham. I want to see just how far this one has traveled. And do not go yet, because there is already another story waiting for you, right there on your screen, right now. Another quiet soul, a proud house decided was worthless. Another account, long overdue, about to be paid in full. Because here is the truth I want you to carry home with you tonight, longer than any name in this story. Be very, very careful how you treat the person you have decided can do nothing for you. The maid, the gateman, the poor relation, the quiet one in the corner your whole household has agreed to look through. Because kindness is the only debt that gathers its interest in the dark, patiently, for years, for generations if it must. And cruelty is the only inheritance that always, always comes due, in front of the very people you were trying to impress. The stone your house throws into the yard as rubbish has a way of turning out to be the cornerstone the whole house was standing on all along. Until next time, my people, guard your kindness. It is worth more than you will ever be told. And never once decide that the quiet one in the corner is nobody. You have no idea whose child they are, or whose account they have come to collect.